Tonight, I'm going to tell you a story that still feels impossible, a nightmare I've lived with for 7 years, only for it to resurface in the most unimaginable way. My name is Clara, and until recently I thought I'd finally come to terms with the biggest mystery of my life: the day my husband vanished. Mark and I had a good life. We were high school sweethearts, built a home in a quiet suburban town, and had a beautiful daughter, Emily, who was just 3 years old when it happened. Mark was a kind man, a dedicated father, a loving husband. He worked as an architect, always sketching, always dreaming up new designs. He was reliable, predictable, the kind of person you never expect to just disappear. But he did. 7 years ago, on a Tuesday morning, he left for work like any other day. He kissed Emily goodbye, told me he loved me, and walked out the door. He never came home. His car was found 3 days later abandoned 10 miles outside of town on a dusty rural road. No signs of a struggle, no note, just an empty car and a silence that screamed louder than any alarm. The police searched for months. Missing persons posters were everywhere. News channels ran his photo. But he was gone, vanished, without a trace. My world imploded. How do you explain to a 3-year-old that her daddy just isn't coming back? How do you keep living when the person you built your entire future with just ceases to exist? The grief was a physical weight, crushing me under its immense pressure. I went through all the stages: denial, anger, unbearable sadness. For years, every knock on the door, every unfamiliar car driving slowly down our street made my heart leap with a desperate hope. But it was never him. Eventually, the police closed the case, listing him as a presumed deceased missing person. My friends and family urged me to move on, to rebuild, and slowly, painfully, I started to. I sold our house, moved to a different town, started a new job. I tried to create a new normal for Emily and me, a life free from the constant shadow of his absence. It wasn't easy, but we were doing it. We were healing. Or so I thought. Life, as it always does, continued. Emily grew into a bright, curious 10-year-old. She asked about her dad, of course. I told her he was an angel watching over us, a good man who loved her very much. It was easier than trying to explain the unexplainable. I even started dating again, cautiously, testing the waters of a future I never thought I'd have. The raw wound of Mark's disappearance had scabbed over, leaving a dull ache rather than a searing pain. I still thought of him every day, every moment, but it was with a sense of melancholic acceptance. The past was the past. The mystery was unsolved, but I had learned to live with it. Until 6 months ago. I was at the local grocery store, pushing my cart through the produce aisle, humming along to the terrible pop music playing over the speakers. It was a mundane Tuesday afternoon, utterly unremarkable. And then I saw him. Just for a second, he was at the end of the aisle, picking out apples. My breath caught in my throat. It was Mark. Or, at least, it looked exactly like him. The same dark, wavy hair, the same strong jawline, even the way he tilted his head slightly as he examined a Granny Smith. My heart leaped into my throat, a sudden, dizzying rush of adrenaline. It was impossible. He was gone. He was presumed dead. My mind screamed at me, telling me it was just a trick of the light, a cruel hallucination brought on by stress. I squeezed my eyes shut, then opened them again. He was still there. I started to move towards him, slowly, cautiously, my legs feeling like lead. But just as I was about to call out his name, a small hand reached up and tugged at his pant leg. A child, a little boy, maybe 3 or 4 years old, with bright, curious eyes. Mark, if it was Mark, scooped him up effortlessly, a tender smile on his face. A smile I hadn't seen in 7 years. And then he walked away, disappearing around the corner, leaving me standing there, frozen. A half-empty shopping cart beside me. It was him. It had to be him. And he had a child. My world, which I thought had finally solidified, cracked wide open once more. I left the grocery store in a daze. Abandoning my cart, the image of Mark and the child burned into my mind. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely grip the steering wheel. All the grief, the anger, the confusion I thought I'd buried came rushing back, multiplied by this new, horrifying reality. He wasn't dead. He had just left and started a new life with a new family. How could he? How could he do that to Emily, to me? The next few days were a blur of restless nights and obsessive thoughts. I couldn't stop seeing his face, his smile, the way he held that little boy. It haunted me. I knew I had to find him. I didn't know what I would say or what I even wanted, but I couldn't live with this new layer of uncertainty. I went back to the grocery store, day after day, hoping to catch another glimpse. Nothing. It was like he was a ghost, appearing just long enough to shatter my peace before vanishing again. I considered calling the police, but what would I say? My presumed dead husband was seen at the grocery store with a child who isn't ours. They'd think I was crazy, grieving, unstable. I had no concrete proof, just a fleeting sighting. So I started my own search. I drove around town, patrolling the parks, the schools, the local coffee shops, any place a family might frequent. It felt desperate, a little insane, but I was beyond caring. I needed answers. 2 weeks later, I got lucky. I saw his black SUV parked outside a small, unassuming house on the outskirts of town. It was in a newer development, not far from where I now lived. My heart pounded. This was it. I parked my car a block away and just watched. For hours. Finally, he emerged, holding the little boy's hand. They walked to the mailbox, chatting, laughing. He looked completely at ease, completely happy, like he hadn't left a gaping hole in my life 7 years ago, like Emily didn't exist. He had simply started over, without a word, without a backward glance. The anger was a hot, burning coal in my chest. He owed me an explanation. He owed Emily a lifetime of explanations. I spent the next few days observing the house. It became an obsession. I memorized the routine. Every morning, Mark would leave around 8 a.m., then return around 5 p.m. The little boy, whose name I later learned was Leo, was often seen playing in the yard with a woman. She was slender, with long blonde hair, and always smiling. His new wife, I presumed. My stomach churned every time I saw them together, a perfect, happy family, living a life that should have been mine. The jealousy was a bitter taste in my mouth, but beneath it was a profound sadness for Emily, who deserved a father who didn't just abandon her for a new, shiny family. I knew I couldn't just confront him in front of this new woman and child. It would be a disaster. I needed to approach him alone, to demand answers without causing a scene that would traumatize even more innocent people. So, I waited for the right moment. One afternoon, I saw him leave the house alone, presumably heading to work. This was my chance. I drove past his house, confirming he was gone, and then I pulled over a few blocks away. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my trembling hands, and walked towards the house. As I approached the front door, I saw the blonde woman still smiling, watering flowers on the porch. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it, the other woman. I swallowed hard and forced a polite smile. "Hi," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "My name is Clara. I think we have a mutual acquaintance." Her smile faltered slightly, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. "Oh," she said, her voice cautious. "And who would that be?" "Mark," I replied, watching her face closely. "Mark Miller." Her smile completely vanished. Her eyes widened, a look of pure shock and confusion replacing her polite demeanor. And then she said something that stopped me dead in my tracks, something that twisted the knife in my already bleeding heart. "Mark Miller?" she repeated, her voice laced with confusion. "I think you have the wrong house. My husband's name is Michael." My blood ran cold. Michael? Not Mark? I must have looked utterly bewildered, because the woman whose name I learned was Jessica quickly pulled me inside. She could see the distress on my face. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice now filled with genuine concern. "Who is Mark Miller?" I stumbled over my words, trying to explain, showing her a picture of my wedding day on my phone, with Mark and me smiling. "This is Mark," I said, my voice shaking. "He's my husband, or he was. He vanished 7 years ago, and I just saw him here, with you and a little boy." Jessica looked at the picture, her eyes widening in disbelief. Then she looked back at me, a dawning horror in her eyes. "That's Michael," she whispered, pointing at my husband's face in the photo. "That's my husband. We've been married for 5 years. That's Leo's father." The room spun. Michael? 5 years? And Leo? My mind raced, trying to put the pieces together. It didn't make sense, but he looks exactly like him, I stammered, my head pounding. The same voice? The same mannerisms? Jessica shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "Michael was adopted," she explained, her voice trembling. "He knew he had a twin brother he never met. He tried to find him for years, but never could. He just assumed he was gone. He always told me he had a missing piece, a feeling of an incomplete identity." My jaw dropped. A twin brother? This was a twist I never saw coming. The man who vanished, my husband Mark, had a twin, and this man Michael had taken on Mark's life? No, that didn't make sense either. Michael was living his own life. He wasn't pretending to be Mark, he was just an identical stranger. Jessica confirmed that Michael had a vague memory of being separated from a twin at birth. Their adoptive parents had told him about it, but the records were sealed. He'd always felt a pull, a desire to find his lost sibling, and now here I was, claiming his twin was my missing husband. The sheer improbability of it hit me. My husband, presumed dead, was not only alive but had an identical twin brother I knew nothing about, who just happened to live a few blocks away from my new home. Jessica and I spent hours talking, piecing together the timeline. It was like we were detectives on a case. Only the victim was my sanity, and the culprit was an unbelievable coincidence. Michael had built a life here years before I moved to this town. He met Jessica, they fell in love, had Leo. His life was completely separate from Mark's. He wasn't an imposter, he was just him. So if this was Michael, where was Mark? The real Mark, my husband. Jessica showed me photos of Michael from different ages. He was unmistakably the same man I had married, the same man who had vanished. But the lives were entirely different. Michael had always been here. Mark hadn't. We were both victims of a truth so bizarre it felt like fiction. The more we talked, the more the pieces started to fit in a terrifying, unexpected way. Jessica, trying to help, remembered something. Michael often talked about a recurring dream, she said. A dream about being somewhere else, a different life. Sometimes a feeling of being watched or a sudden, unexplained urge to do something he couldn't explain. She also mentioned a recent short period where Michael had been confused, disoriented. A few months before I saw him at the grocery store. He'd gone on a business trip that felt odd, coming back withdrawn and quiet. A chill ran down my spine. The pieces clicked into place with a sickening clarity. Mark wasn't dead, and he hadn't just left and started a new life. Michael wasn't living Mark's life. The horrifying truth was something else entirely. It was an identity swap. I asked Jessica for something, anything that could prove what I was starting to suspect. She remembered a small, distinct tattoo Michael had on his inner wrist, a small anchor, a tattoo Mark also had. But Mark had gotten his after we met. It was a matching tattoo we got together. Michael's tattoo was different. It was a small family crest, but it was in the same spot. It was almost like one had been altered or replaced. This wasn't about twins living separate lives. This was about one life being stolen. The next day, armed with Jessica's unwitting revelations and my own growing dread, I called the police again. This time, I had more than just a fleeting sighting. I had a photo, a timeline, and a chilling theory. I explained everything: the missing husband, the identical twin, the strange details. They were skeptical at first, but the consistency of the story combined with the 7-year-old missing persons report compelled them to investigate. They brought Michael in for questioning. It was a delicate situation because he truly seemed to have no memory of a Mark Miller or a previous life. Jessica was distraught, standing by her husband, utterly confused. The police ran DNA tests. They compared old photos of Mark with current photos of Michael. The results were undeniable. They were genetically identical. They were twins. But there was something more. The fingerprint analysis came back. Michael's fingerprints were on the abandoned car from 7 years ago. My husband Mark had indeed vanished, and the man living across the street, the man I thought was his identical twin, wasn't Michael at all. He was Mark, my husband, the real Mark, who had been living a completely new life, a new identity after he abandoned me and Emily 7 years ago. He had somehow found his long-lost twin brother Michael, perhaps during that business trip Jessica mentioned, and engineered a swap. He had killed Michael, leaving his body in the abandoned car, faking his own death. He then took Michael's identity, his life, his wife, and even his son. Why? Because Michael had a life with no trace of us. No Clara, no Emily. A clean slate. He wanted to escape, and he found the perfect way out by stealing his brother's identity and killing him to erase the past. All those years he had been living across the street from me and Emily, watching us while we grieved for him, the dead husband and father. He knew Emily. He saw her grow up. He watched me struggle, and he felt nothing but a cold, calculating desire to maintain his new, free life. He confessed everything. His confession was delivered with a chilling calmness, a lack of remorse that defied belief. He admitted to killing Michael, to taking his life as his own, all to escape the responsibilities and the person he had become. He faced charges for murder and identity theft. The news ripped through our small town, leaving a trail of shock and horror. Emily now has to reconcile that her angel father was actually alive, a murderer, and an imposter living a few blocks away. Jessica lost her real husband, Michael, to a man who stole his life. We are all survivors of Mark's horrifying deception. My perfect husband, my perfect life, all a calculated lie hidden in plain sight. This isn't just my confession, it's a plea. If this story touched you, disturbed you, or stayed with you, don't leave in silence. Subscribe, comment, share. We release new confessions every week because someone out there is still hiding